All right, to get started, there's a couple of things that you need. You don't need a whole lot of equipment to get started with polymer, um, but you'll need a little bit of equipment because you've got to condition the clay before you can start using it. So a couple of things that you're going to want or need is you'll need some sort of surface to work on. You could work on a plastic placemat. I've got, this glass board. I just bought, like, some people just use like a glass cutting board. It should be glass, and the reason why you can't, like, just if you have a wooden table, don't put polymer on a wooden table because the plasticizers in the polymer clay actually eat the finish off of the wooden table. So you'll want something glass to work on. One of the things that you probably want to do is to get, I think this cost me 30 cents at Lowe's, just to get one of these larger white tiles to work on. Or, like I said, if you've got this a glass surface you can work on, that's fine too. I like the tile because if I'm working on a piece and I need to turn it around to work on it, the tile is better than trying to move this glass piece. I like this glass piece because of the markings on it, and I really do use these markings to, center pieces, cut angles, different things like that. But, this is an expensive piece, so just to start working with it, you don't need that. If you're just getting a piece of glass, make sure that it's tempered. Otherwise, as you are working on polymer, you could actually crack the glass. You will need a roller. This is is part of a beginner set of stuff that you need for polymer clay. But you don't have to have this. You could just get a 1-inch piece of PVC pipe that's about this long. You need this in order to be able to roll the clay, to get it even flat surface, and to condition the clay as well. So you'll need a roller. You need some sort of blade to be able to cut the polymer. We use actually surgical tissue blades. But if you go to Michael's or Hobby Lobby, you can get a blade that is specific for polymer clay that also gives you a little bit of protection like this one. It's a thicker blade, but you also get these safety handles so that, you're not trying to hold a tissue blade cutting the clay and you actually end up accidentally cut yourself, because these are really sharp. I mean, this is what they use in labs to section pieces of skin off to be able to examine under a microscope. So these you have to be really careful. So I would just, if you want to use a blade, and you'll want a blade, that's one of the basic tools that you need. I would just get a polymer clay blade, one of those starter kits. Okay. Some blades are very stiff. These blades are bendable so that when you cut the clay into shapes, you can do that. You can bend it. Some aren't as bendable as, like, these are really, really bendable. And then other blades are really, really thick and they are not bendable. Okay. So again, this is a surgical blade. And I can't remember where I got this from. But you'll do fine. You'll do fine with these. Okay. One of the other things that we used to not use to condition polymer clay before we figured out dual purpose for a pasta machine was we used playing cards, and I don't have playing cards. I just keep a supply of these 3x5 index cards because I do cure pieces on here. You don't want to cure pieces on a shiny surface because then the back of your piece ends up being shiny as well. But I would work on this and then put it on a 3x5 index card and stick that in the oven, and then the pieces just come off of that. But what we used to do is we used to use thicknesses of this card, and they measured them by, you know, like 10 cards was, I don't know, 2 millimeters thick, whatever, and they would lay them on the surface with the clay in between. So say this clay was in between, in order to get it the same thickness across. So then you would use the cards as your guide to make sure that you were rolling the clay at the same thickness. Well, then we discovered pasta machines, and they became affordable, probably with the foodie movement. I'm not sure. I was introduced to using a pasta machine when I first started working with polymer clay. So pasta machine, you can go to Hobby Lobby and get a craft pasta machine. They call it a polymer clay machine for about $30. You just have to be careful with it because it is a craft machine. I went through 2 of those within the first 2 months of me working with polymer when I was trying to soften up and condition that hard Kato clay. Just absolutely stripped the gears on the pasta machine. So I've learned from then, and I actually get a pasta machine now. Usually get a Mankato, I think is the brand, pasta machine. Online, and it's usually about $60. Marcato, I'm sorry, Marcato, and I'll put links to those as well. It's worth it if you're going to be getting into polymer clay to go ahead and get the tools that are going to make the prepping of the clay easier, so that you're not having to spend a lot of your time conditioning the clay. And it's not just for conditioning, it's for a lot of different things. So let me show you. I've got some dust on here. Get the dust off. The first thing is, let me adjust the camera so you can see. Here's the end of my desk, okay? And so the pasta machine comes with this hole here and a C-clamp for you to be able to fasten it to your desktop, and you have to do that. It can't just sit on top here because your crank won't work, and when you crank, your machine's going to be tipping over. So you do have to clamp it to your desktop, to a desk. I had it on a much thinner desk before. Okay, I'm going to tighten that C-clamp. And you'll know it's tight when you can't move the clay machine. You might still get a little bit of movement here, but you really want it tight, okay? And then it comes with the handle and your crank handle, okay? That lets you, let me move this a little bit closer. That lets you roll the clay through. And then the setting over here is the thickness. So I'm going to set it to the thickest setting. And if you'll see how wide the rollers are apart, and then as I go up in numbers to the thinnest setting, now it's quite a bit thinner. And so when people say roll your clay out to a number 4 thickness, that's what they're talking about here. Now, of course, it's confusing because some machines, the 9 is the thickest, and on other machines, 1 is the thickest. So they'll usually say, and on my pasta machine, 1 is my thickest setting. Or they'll say, on my pasta machine, 9 is the thickest setting, and you just have to adjust your mind to that. So that's what we use to condition clay. Now, conditioning clay is making the particles in this vinyl putty behave. And so you've got to get them activated. You've got to get them, in some clays, you get them lined up, going the right direction. So let me show you how to do that. So I'm going to use this Primo Fuchsia right out of the package. Okay. And I don't condition the whole thing of Primo. I do it by at least halves. So I usually cut this in half, and then I'll show you what else. So this is a little bit soft just coming out of the package. It's a little warm here in my studio, and the temperature in the studio will affect the clay. If it's really cold in your studio, the clay is going to be harder to work with and you'll need to warm it up. But even out of the package, this is pretty soft. But I still want to condition it to make sure that it's going to behave itself when I start working with it. So let me cut this in half. And I'll just take this 1 ounce piece. Now, funny story, when I first started working with polymer clay, I was taking a class at Hobby Lobby, and the gal said the way that you needed to activate polymer clay was to get the molecules moving. So some people would like put it on the floor and step on it to get the molecules moving. But what she did was she said you need to do this to get the molecules moving, right? All right, so then I went to another class with one of the experienced artists, Lindley Hunani, and she said we were all pounding on our clay, and she goes, wait a minute, what are you all doing? We said, well, we're getting the molecules activated. She said, no, you don't need to make all that racket. So what she recommended was you take your block, but then you cut it into smaller pieces that can go right into, gosh, did I pick the dullest blade I have? So these can go right into the pasta machine, because you wouldn't be able to feed this big piece into the pasta machine, because that's how you break your pasta machine. So you need to bring it down to a width that can go through the pasta machine. So, you know, that still is a little thick. Let me get a different blade than this one, because that is obviously not my sharpest one. See if this one's better. And again, just be careful of your fingers, because it's really easy to slice your fingers open. Okay, so this is so much better, because it should just slice through the clay, not be frustrating like that. Okay, so you know, we've got it at different widths here, but these will go through the pasta machine. So you never start on one to start working on your pasta machine, because it's the furthest apart and you'd be tempted to put huge blocks through there. So I always set my machine to 2, which is the second thickest. And then I just put my clay in there and roll it. Okay, and then I bring it out, and now I'm going to start building it into a sheet. So I might put these two together and these two together. I've got that. Now I'm going to put all of it together so that I am conditioning the 1 ounce of clay all at the same time. Okay, so this is on a number 2, and like I said, this clay, because it's so warm in here, already feels really good. But generally, people will say, make sure you run it through about 20 times. Other people will say, well, run it through at 2, and then don't fold it over. Run it through at 3, 4, 5, and then come back down, and that'll condition it. One of the other things is that it's important to condition the clay so that you're not getting air bubbles in the clay. You can try to get the air bubbles out, but sometimes you can't see the air bubbles until after you've cured your piece. And that's really frustrating, because you've got this gorgeous smooth piece of clay and there's a bump in it that because of an air bubble. And after it's cured, it really ruins the piece. You might be able to sand it down, but a lot of times the air bubbles just ruin the piece. So when you're conditioning clay, if you're folding it over, and there's going to be a lot of times, especially as we're mixing colors, that you'll want to fold it over, make sure that you fold it over and you put the fold in first. Don't put the clay in like this, because you're going to catch all the air bubbles here at the top. So always make sure that you're putting the fold in first, so that it's forcing the air out as you condition the clay. You can, if you want to, if you see how it's kind of growing into a long piece. If you wanted a longer, skinnier piece, you could fold it like this. And again, as long as the air is being pushed up out this way, that's fine. You can do that. And I mean, it's not all over. If you introduce air bubbles to your clay, you can, if you identify them in the uncured clay, you can just pinprick them and then massage the clay to get rid of the air bubble. So it's not the end of the world, but you really want to try not to introduce too many air bubbles into your clay. All right. So you will know that your clay is conditioned when you can fold it. And when you fold it, the clay doesn't break apart. So let me see if I've got a piece that's been sitting around for a while. This is pretty warm, so this might not work. Okay, so do you see how that broke apart? That means that I need to recondition this clay, because the molecules aren't moving enough for me to be able to fold it and it not crack like this. So I would just need to put this back through and recondition a couple of times. And let's do 4. Let's do 4 times, see what it does. Okay, and see, now I can fold it and it doesn't have those cracks in it. Okay, all right, so you've got to condition the clay before you can start working with it. And that's just so that it behaves the way you want it to, that it will stick to each other when you want it to stick to each other, that the clay will blend, colors will blend when you want them to blend, that you can roll the clay into really small balls or really small rolls of clay. It just needs to be kind of soft and pliable. I wish I could pass this around to you. I'm trying to think of anything that would feel like this. Pie crust sometimes feels like this. It's not quite, well, it's kind of like silly putty. And it is a little bit sticky, so you can see it does stick to my thumb a little bit. So you also have to be careful about where you set this clay. You don't want to set it on top of other clay, because it'll stick and then you're stuck. So that's 2 ways of conditioning the clay, either using the pasta machine or getting some index cards, dividing them equally and putting the clay in between it. And you would have to measure how many of the index cards equals. We usually work in centimeters, so the measurements on the pasta machine really are according to centimeters, and a lot of the directions for the tutorials for how to make a creation with polymer clay will talk about centimeters. So that's another way if you don't want to invest in a pasta machine.